Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics. But before that, we have an important announcement. This Sunday, that is on the 13th of August, we shall be conducting the BYJU'S National Scholarship Test, where you can stand to win 90% scholarship on our IAS courses. So do take up the scholarship test. It goes live at 11 a.m. and you can register by using the link provided in the description box below. So with this, let's take a look at the topics we are going to cover in today's The Hindu News Analysis. I have chosen 9 important articles from the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. There are 3 articles which requires a detailed discussion from a mains point of view, and we have 6 more articles that are relevant for the prelims exam. So let's cover these topics one by one, and if you guys are liking the initiative, why don't you support us by pressing the like button, share these videos with other aspirants, and do subscribe to our channel. So let's begin the discussion by looking at the first article from page number 6. In this column, the writer is talking about cluster bombs or cluster munitions and the threat posed by cluster munitions. So first, let's understand in what context is this topic in news. Let's understand what are cluster ammunitions, and we'll talk about the convention on cluster ammunitions. The reason why the topic is in news is because as part of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, the United States, which has been supplying weapons and providing financial aid to Ukraine, has recently announced that it is going to supply cluster ammunitions to Ukraine to be used against Russian aggression. So this has triggered a major controversy regarding the usage of cluster bombs in conflict. In fact, since the war began in February 2022, there have been many documented instances where Russia has already used cluster bombs against Ukrainian cities. Now, as part of the counter-retaliation, as US has been assisting Ukraine through military aid, it has announced the supply of cluster bombs which Ukrainian forces also can start using against Russian forces. So the blatant usage of cluster bombs, which is actually prohibited under international law, has triggered a major controversy. So it's in this context that we should first understand what exactly are cluster munitions, or also called as cluster bombs. Cluster bombs, they essentially release multiple bomblets or multiple explosive submunitions into the air. Essentially, it is one large canister which is either fired by an artillery gun that is based on land, or it could be released through a fighter jet directly in the air. Such a cluster bomb, the canister, once it opens up, it releases multiple bomblets. There are cluster bombs which can contain up to 200 bomblets or explosive submunitions which are released and spread out over a large area. So bombing an entire area through such bombs is also referred to as carpet bombing, because the entire region is bombed by using these cluster munitions which release these tiny bomblets that spread out and target that entire region. Now, the usage of such weapons is highly controversial, it is objectionable and even considered as illegal under international law, because such bombs, they cause indiscriminate damage. Such bombs are not targeted. They are not targeting only military sites and combatants. They will even end up killing and injuring hundreds and thousands of civilians, which is a case of disproportionate use of force. Is that clear? And also the problem is that these cluster bombs, they tend to have a very high dud rate, meaning several of these bomblets, they fall on the ground but they don't detonate. They don't blow up instantly, rather they remain dormant for several years in the battlefield. Is that clear? Some of these bomblets, they don't blow off or they don't explode and they lie dormant. It's like how you light firecrackers on Diwali and some of them don't blow up or don't explode and lie dormant. And in some cases, it might explode a little while later. So the concern here is that such dormant bomblets which are spread out in the battlefield, they eventually become like landmines. Even in the future, maybe few years after the war has ended or few decades after the war has ended, even then it poses a threat, especially to civilian population, if someone were to trip on these bombs. So essentially it becomes like a landmine. It's like that whole area is mined with bombs. So this is a huge threat to civilian population, and it does not discriminate against civilians. It does not discriminate combatants from civilians, and particularly women, children. The whole civilian population would be extremely vulnerable. So given this long-term risk and this disproportionate risk posed by cluster bombs, the usage of such bombs is termed as illegal under international law. Using such weapons in conflict is seen as extremely inhuman, as it causes significant damage. It not just targets military sites and combatants, it ends up killing civilian population. It could end up harming civilian targets, and the worst part is that it has a long-term impact. Because of the high dud rate, some of the bomblets might just land on the ground without exploding, and these bomblets which are dormant, they might explode in the future, thus posing a permanent threat to the civilian population. So now, Ukraine deploying cluster bombs by procuring them from United States heightens the risk in this conflict zone. As I told you, there are documented instances where Russia has already used such cluster bombs. Russia has blatantly attacked Ukrainian cities like Kharkiv with cluster bombs, and hundreds of civilians have already been killed. But that is no justification to use cluster bombs from the other side as well. So that is why the writer is taking a very balanced stand on the issue and is calling for complete elimination of cluster munitions in the world. He's not focused on geopolitics. He's not focused on who's using cluster bombs and who's not. Russian forces have used cluster bombs in the war, and yes, they have committed large-scale atrocities. And now, US is supplying similar ammunition to Ukraine, and this could further heighten the risk. So the writer is calling for complete elimination of these cluster munitions. These deadly bombs have been used in conflict at least since the Second World War. During the Second World War, there was widespread usage of cluster bombs, particularly in the European theater of conflict. Later, major powers like United States, they have used cluster bombs in all their conflicts, be it in the Vietnam War, be it during the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. Carpet bombing was a preferred practice by the United States and NATO allies. Many other countries, they have used cluster bombs in wars and conflicts. According to Cluster Munition Monitor, which is a human rights organization that keeps track of the threats posed by cluster bombs, it has estimated that since the 1960s, anywhere between 56,000 to 86,000 civilians have been killed because of cluster ammunitions. That is the devastating impact of these bombs. So to tackle the threat, several countries came together and they have adopted a global convention. We have a convention in place, the Convention on Cluster Munitions, that prohibits the usage of cluster bombs, and it also prohibits the production, the storage, and the transfer and the stockpiling of cluster ammunitions. So those countries which sign and ratify this convention, who become party to it, they will have a legal obligation under international law to not produce cluster bombs, to not stockpile cluster bombs, to not transfer it to other countries, and not use them in conflict. But however, these obligations applies only to the parties who have signed and ratified the convention. It creates a framework as well. It creates a legally binding framework on the member countries to put in place a victim assistance framework and a framework to clear contaminated sites along with spreading awareness about dormant cluster bombs and to destroy the existing stockpiles. These are some legal obligations that have to be taken up by the member countries which are party to the Convention on Cluster Munition. Is that clear? They should destroy all the existing stockpile. They should stop producing cluster bombs. They are prohibited from transferring it to other countries, and they are definitely prohibited from using it in conflict. They should also create a victim support program, because if there are victims of cluster bombs with regard to a particular country, those victims have to be assisted financially in their recovery. Then, if there are any contaminated sites, let's say a country has used cluster bombs in the past in a battlefield, and there are dormant cluster bombs lying around, it becomes the responsibility of that country to clear those contaminated sites. It also has to spread awareness among the civilian population regarding the presence of dormant cluster bombs in a battlefield, so that people don't accidentally trip on them. These are the legal commitments, the legal obligations on those countries which have signed and ratified the convention. But the concern here is that many major military powers have not signed and ratified the Convention on Cluster Ammunition. See, this convention was adopted in the year 2008 in Dublin, and eventually it came into force in 2010. As per latest data, at least until April 2023, around 111 countries have ratified this convention, with another 12 countries having signed but not ratified the convention. So the convention does have a lot of global support, but however, it is not universal. It's not universally adopted, meaning there are still many countries, many major military powers which have deliberately not signed the Convention on Cluster Ammunition. This includes key powers like United States, Russia, China, India, Israel, and of course, Ukraine as well. Please look at this map. The map clearly depicts the countries which have signed, ratified, and those who are not party to this convention. So major powers like India, US, China, Russia and Ukraine and Israel, they are not party to the Convention on Cluster Ammunition. So as a result, these countries are not under the international obligation. That is what they claim at least. Now, for example, Russia, when it used cluster bombs against Ukraine and when it was criticized, Russia's defense, Russia's argument was that we are not party to the convention. So we are not breaking international law by using cluster bombs. This was the argument of Russia. Now even Ukraine and US are making the same argument. They're saying that the US is not breaking international law by transferring cluster bombs to Ukraine because to begin with, US and Ukraine, they are not party to the convention. Ukraine also has the same defense. Ukraine is saying that we can use cluster bombs because Russia has already used it and we are not party to the Convention on Cluster Ammunition. So given this argument by the non-parties to the convention, the writer is saying that these countries are forgetting that there is something called as customary international law. Customary international law is part of international norms which are accepted, which are to be followed and implemented by all the countries, irrespective of whether they have signed or ratified or adopted these international norms. There are two specific provisions that the writer is highlighting, where the prohibition on cluster bombs gets covered as part of customary international law and thereby becomes a legal international obligation on every country, irrespective of whether they have signed the convention or not. The writer is pointing to Article 51, Clause 4 of Additional Protocol 1 to the 1949 Geneva Conventions. The Geneva Conventions deals with the rules of engagement in a war. It deals with war crimes. It deals with human rights violations in a conflict. This set of conventions were adopted following the Second World War. And under Article 51, Clause 4, there is a very, very important provision that prohibits indiscriminate attacks. According to this provision of Additional Protocol 1 to Geneva Conventions, the usage of indiscriminate force is prohibited under international law. Doesn't matter whether you're party to it or not, it applies universally on every country. Is that clear? See, in any conflict, military forces, they are expected under international law to distinguish between civilians and combatants, to distinguish between civilian targets like cities, urban buildings, etc., and military targets like military bases, missile silos, etc. So in any conflict, it is an international obligation on armed forces to clearly distinguish between civilian targets and military targets. As per customary international law laid out under Geneva Conventions, armed forces are prohibited from using indiscriminate force against civilians and civilian targets. Is that clear? Now, this being the case, the usage of cluster bombs inherently violates this principle. Because as we discussed, cluster bombs don't discriminate between civilians and combatants. In fact, cluster bombs are known to cause more damage to civilian population. So because of this, a country will be violating Article 51 Clause 4. That is why the writer is arguing that using such weapons is illegal, irrespective of whether the country has signed or ratified the Convention on Cluster Ammunition. So he's saying that the argument of Russia, US, Ukraine is not valid. Even though they are not party to the convention, this is a customary international law which is obligatory on every country. You have to ensure that you discriminate, you treat civilians separately from combatants. In times of war, you can't target civilian population just like the way you target military forces and military installations. This is clearly prohibited and termed as illegal. That is why the writer is pointing out that the usage of cluster bombs is illegal under international law. And it doesn't matter whether a country is party to the convention or not. He's also bringing up another important point. He says that under Article 51 Clause 5 of Additional Protocol to the Geneva Conventions, there is a principle called proportionality. Proportionality means that in a conflict, the use of force should be proportional to the threat being faced and to the objectives, the military objectives which are to be achieved. Countries cannot use disproportionate force depending on the extent of the threat, depending on their stated military objectives. They have to use proportional military force in a war or conflict. This is also seen as part of customary international law. So even this makes it an obligation to prohibit the use of cluster bombs, and any usage of cluster bombs in a conflict will be a violation of international law, whether a country has signed the convention or not. So this is the argument the writer is bringing out. He's pointing out that the defense being provided by US, Russia and Ukraine is not valid. Just because they are not party to the convention doesn't mean that they don't have other international obligations. So he's pointing to Article 51 Clause 4 and Clause 5 of the Additional Protocol 1 to Geneva Conventions and saying that using cluster bombs will lead to indiscriminate violence against civilians as well. It is a case of disproportionate use of force against civilians, and this is a breach of human rights. It's a breach of international law. So based on this argument, he is asking Russia and Ukraine to follow the international law, to follow the Convention on Cluster Ammunition. Now coming to the United States, the question is, does the US violate any international law if it simply transfers the cluster bombs? Legally speaking, the US will not be in violation. I'll explain why. See, US, Russia, Ukraine, all three are not party to the Convention on Cluster Ammunition. But who's using the cluster bombs eventually? It is Russia and Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine will breach the customary international law under Geneva Conventions if they use cluster bombs, because usage of cluster bombs is indiscriminate and disproportionate. But the US itself is not using cluster bombs in the conflict. It is simply transferring the cluster bombs. So there is no customary international law which explicitly prohibits the transfer of such weapons. So legally speaking, the US is not violating any international law by transferring cluster bombs to Ukraine. See, if both were parties to the convention, that was a different case. Then the transfer of cluster bombs would be prohibited, right? If they still were doing it, that would be illegal. But now that is not the case. US is not breaking any international law per se, because both US and Ukraine are not party to the Convention on Cluster Ammunition. And there is no customary international law that explicitly prohibits the transfer of such weapons. So technically speaking, legally, yes, the US is not violating any international law. But however, the writer says that this is not an excuse to show such irresponsible behavior. He says that the usage of cluster ammunition, despite its proven violation of human rights, is irresponsible behavior on such countries, and he says that any use of military force in a conflict should be proportional and discriminate. Usage of force should be aimed at military targets, at combatants, not at civilians. So that is the reason why he is urging the United Nations and all the member countries to act together to ensure that the convention becomes universal by pushing for its adoption by every country so that we can completely eliminate cluster bombs from the face of the earth. Is that clear? The writer is urging for complete elimination of cluster bombs from the face of the earth by ensuring that this convention is globally adopted by every country. So he's urging the United Nations and all the responsible members to act together and convince the others who are not party to it to sign and accede to the treaty. If you look at other NATO allies like Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, France, they're all signatories to the convention. They're all abiding by the Convention on Cluster Bombs. They've eliminated their stockpile. They're no longer producing or using cluster bombs. So these influential countries can put pressure on US, Russia, Ukraine, even India, China, and push them to adopt the convention so that the world is completely rid of these cluster bombs. So this is a very, very important argument the writer is making. He's bringing out some key points in international relations, and I feel it's a very important topic for GS paper 2. Now let's move on to the next article. Let's look at this column from page number 8 that is relevant for science and technology and environment and ecology. This article is focused on nuclear power. It is focused on a specific type of nuclear reactor known as small nuclear modular reactors. The writer of the column is urging the greater adoption of this type of nuclear reactor, the small nuclear modular reactors. The writer says that if SMR reactors are widely used and installed around the world, it could help countries achieve net zero emissions, which is a target that many countries are pursuing as part of their climate action goals. Net zero means you are equating your carbon sequestration with carbon emissions. That is the amount of carbon emissions a country is contributing. If it is equated with the carbon emissions being sequestered and saved, then a country achieves a state of net zero emissions. That is, in net terms, the country would not be contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, which contributes to global warming. Many developed countries have declared net zero emissions as a target by 2040, 2045. Countries like US, then European countries, they're all striving to achieve net zero emissions by 2045, by the middle of the century. Countries like China have announced a net zero target by 2060. India also has set a net zero target. So please identify what is the deadline India has given for itself under the Paris Agreement. As part of the voluntary contributions that countries are making under Paris Agreement to tackle climate change, India has announced a voluntary net zero target. So find out the year, the deadline that the Modi government has set to ensure that India becomes a net zero emission country. So please mention that in the comments. Find out the net zero emission target that India has set for itself and do mention that in the comments. Now, India's path towards net zero emissions is largely based on adoption of clean, renewable energy, which is mainly dependent on solar and wind power. In fact, most countries around the world are depending on solar and wind power and electric vehicles and battery storage to reduce dependency on fossil fuels like coal, crude oil, natural gas, etc. It's fossil fuels that essentially emit greenhouse gas emissions, right? So coal is widely used in thermal power industry to produce electricity. Crude oil, natural gas is used for transportation and for various other industrial applications. So the goal of most of the countries is to transition towards a clean economy, to decarbonize their economy. By switching to renewable sources of energy such as solar power and wind power. So especially when it comes to electricity generation, the focus of the world is to shift from thermal power, that is coal-based, fossil fuel-based power, to solar and wind power. And to widely adopt and deploy solar and wind power, you need batteries that can store this energy and transmit this through the grid. That is what will help in increasing the adoption of these renewable forms of energy. In terms of transportation, the push is for electric vehicles. And again, you need efficient batteries that can store the energy and drive the vehicles. So this is the path that the world is following towards clean and renewable energy. And apart from these investments in solar, wind power, electric vehicles, countries are also investing in nuclear power. Because nuclear power or nuclear energy, through which electricity can be produced very efficiently, this is also a type of clean energy. Nuclear power is clean. By splitting the atom, right, the electricity that is generated, it's free from emissions, and even its stress on the environment is very limited compared to other large projects like hydropower projects, thermal power plants. The carbon footprint of a nuclear power plant is very, very less. So around the world, there is a push towards nuclear energy as well, and countries are mainly investing in large nuclear power plants. The problem with large nuclear power plants is that they are facing a lot of challenges. The problem with large nuclear power plants is that there are plenty of challenges associated with them. There is a high risk of nuclear accidents. There is concern about how the nuclear fuel, the spent fuel, will be handled because that's an environmental hazard. There is also concern about the rising cost and the delays in setting up large nuclear facilities. So this is where the writer is suggesting that the world should adopt small nuclear modular reactors as an alternative to complement the large nuclear power plants. He's not saying we should replace the large plants with the small reactors. He's saying that along with pursuing the large nuclear plants, we should also complement that by setting up hundreds and hundreds of small nuclear modular reactors to achieve the net zero emission target. The writer says that this will help the world to achieve UN Sustainable Development Goal number 7, which is to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, modern energy for all. So let's understand a little more about the writer's argument. Let's see why the writer does not believe that solar and wind power alone is not the solution to achieve net zero emissions. Let's talk about the limitations with large nuclear power plants and how small modular reactors can be a good alternative. See, the problem with just relying on solar and wind energy is that we'll end up heavily depending on batteries. You need extremely efficient lithium-ion batteries to store the energy being produced through solar projects and wind projects in order to sustain the power grids. The same is the case for electric vehicles. To ensure that transportation is efficient, which is based on electric vehicles, you need efficient batteries to store the energy. Currently, the solution is lithium-ion batteries. But the problem with lithium-ion batteries is that it leads to heavy dependency on critical minerals and even rare earth elements. We have to depend extremely on few critical resources and rarely available resources such as lithium, nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements. So it essentially means that around the world, mining projects are going to increase because of our dependency on lithium, nickel and cobalt, because of the critical need for rare earth elements to produce the batteries that are needed to store the energy from solar power and wind power, right? And to adopt electric vehicles as well, we have to rely heavily on these metals, and it means that mining will increase and thus emissions will increase. So electric vehicles are not as clean as you think. Is that clear? Solar power also is not as clean as you think. There may not be direct emissions through the production of energy in electric vehicles and solar and wind power. But if you take the entire process into equation, then you will notice that the dependency on these critical minerals will increase mining exponentially. Countries are already rushing to secure their mining resources around the world, and major producers are already ramping up mining activities. From China to Australia, to Democratic Republic of Congo, to Indonesia, to Bolivia, Chile, right, all around the world, wherever these resources are present, large-scale mining is already taking place, and this will only increase further. Mining is not just a major environmental threat, but it will directly contribute to more emissions. It will increase our dependency on fossil fuels again, because the machinery, the vehicles needed, they will all depend on crude oil, natural gas and coal, and it will drive up our fossil fuel dependency. Is that clear? In fact, we are already noticing this trend in many countries. In Europe, for example, even though European countries are switching to cleaner energy based on solar and wind power, you witness a parallel rise in their dependency on fossil fuels as well. In fact, in developed countries, coal consumption and even natural gas consumption has increased despite the increased adoption of solar power and wind power. So that is why the writer is clearly pointing out that relying only on solar and wind power is not the solution. Yes, this is part of the solution, but not the only solution. Because excessive dependency on critical minerals will lead to more pollution. It will lead to more emissions. It will further increase our fossil fuel dependency, even though we are adopting clean and renewable energy. So that is not a path, it's not a solution to achieve net zero emissions. So that is why the writer is highlighting the importance of nuclear power. We have to pay more attention to nuclear power and assign a higher allocation to nuclear energy in our energy basket. Every country has a certain allocation for different sources of energy. In India, for example, almost 58% of our electricity is coming through thermal power plants, which are fired by coal, right? We have scaled up our solar and wind investments. We are stepping up our nuclear investments as well, but they are still a small percentage of the total energy basket. Now, the writer says that today, around 10% of the world's electricity is already coming from large nuclear power plants. And the benefits are there to see. Around 10% of the global electricity is coming through nuclear power plants, and it is helping us avoid 180 billion cubic meters of natural gas and bring down CO2 emissions by 1.5 billion tons every year. That is the estimate he is providing based on the nuclear plants that are operating in the world. Nuclear energy, as I told you, is a clean form of energy. But however, there are risks and challenges associated with large nuclear power plants. The biggest risk is of a nuclear accident. What if there is a large-scale nuclear accident like the Fukushima disaster or the Chernobyl disaster, right? That could wipe out entire cities, kill thousands of people, cause radiation leakage that could harm the environment as well. So a nuclear disaster is always a massive risk in case of large nuclear power plants. Along with that, it's difficult to source highly enriched uranium, which is needed for electricity generation. There are a lot of international safeguards implemented through International Atomic Energy Agency that has to be followed when you are setting up a large nuclear power plant, because to prevent nuclear proliferation and to prevent any nuclear accidents from occurring, these international safeguards have to be strictly implemented. So this increases the challenges associated with a nuclear project. Also, the cost and the frequent delays has become a challenge in completing large nuclear power plants. This is a challenge most countries are facing, be it India, be it European countries, even US, even Japan, right? They've all faced these challenges when setting up large nuclear power plants, because large nuclear power plants comes with their own sets of risks and challenges. But the advantage of nuclear power is that it is all weather power, unlike solar and wind energy. Now please remember, solar and wind power have a very big limitation. They are dependent on few factors. You can generate solar power only during daytime and only when there is good amount of sunshine, right? During night, you can't generate solar power. Same with wind. Wind energy is dependent on weather patterns. So you can't guarantee consistent grid supply if you depend heavily on solar and wind power. You can't meet the electricity demand consistently through solar and wind energy. That is one more reason why solar and wind energy are not very efficient. Even though it is part of the solution, it can't be the only solution. Whereas nuclear energy can be produced 24/7 through the day, throughout the year, without any stops. So that way it is more grid efficient, it will help you meet and sustain the demand, and it will also create a number of high-skilled jobs in technology, manufacturing and operations. Because nuclear technology is more sophisticated compared to solar and wind power, it has a greater potential to boost research and development and manufacturing and create thousands and thousands of jobs in the country. So the writer says nuclear energy does have a lot of advantages, but when it comes to setting up large nuclear plants, there are a number of risks and challenges involved. One of the biggest concern is the frequent delays in completing the project, the frequent increase in cost because of the scale of the large nuclear plants, because of the challenge in procuring uranium on large scale, the challenges in dealing with safety measures, right? And some international obligations. They all create challenges for your conventional large nuclear power plants. Is that clear? So this is where the writer points out that small modular reactors hold tremendous potential. Generally, we have three types of nuclear reactors. We have the large conventional nuclear reactors, which can produce electricity up to 700 megawatts and above, right? That is a starting threshold for conventional large nuclear power plants such as these, which you can see in the image. Whereas a small modular reactor, right, it requires very small land area to be installed, and it can generate up to 300 megawatts of energy. So that is what we classify as a small modular nuclear reactor. Any small nuclear plant which is designed to generate energy or electricity to a maximum of 300 megawatts is a small modular reactor. We also have micro reactors that produce up to 10 megawatts of energy, which is often used in spacecrafts, nuclear powered submarines, etc. Alright, so these are the three types of nuclear reactors. Currently, for generating electricity on a large scale, countries depend on large nuclear power plants. In India, for example, we have the Kundankulam nuclear plant being built by Russia. We have nuclear power plants in Rajasthan, in Uttar Pradesh, in Karnataka, and in few other parts of the country. All these are large nuclear power plants, which involves very large nuclear reactors. They require a lot of nuclear fuel, that is uranium, and it requires a lot of safety measures to be put in place to prevent any accidents or nuclear proliferation. Countries use micro reactors as well, primarily to power submarines and spacecrafts. But however, there is very little focus on small modular reactors. The writer says that small modular reactors, they present a number of advantages. The advantage is that these reactors can be very easily set up in decommissioned thermal power plant sites itself. It will not consume more land. You don't have to scout for fresh land, clear forests to set up these small nuclear reactor facilities. Whereas setting up a large nuclear power plant will require a lot of land area. You have to follow zoning standards, create a safe buffer zone, and ensure there are no civilian habitations present around a large nuclear power plant because of the risk of accidents. But in the case of a small nuclear reactor, the risk of accident is very, very low, and it does not require large amounts of land. You can use existing thermal power plants and decommission them and replace them with small nuclear reactors. The best part is that their accident risk is extremely low. They use a very small nuclear core. The nuclear fuel which is used at the core of the reactor, right? It's a very small core that reduces the likelihood of an accident. And the source term, which is a measure of radioactive contamination, is also many times lesser than your conventional large nuclear power plants. And also in a small modular reactor, there are multiple fail-safe designs. It has adequate seismic protection to protect these plants from earthquakes. Earthquakes are a major risk for large nuclear power plants. For example, the Fukushima nuclear accident, which happened in 2011, was a result of earthquakes and tsunamis that hit Japan in 2011. So small modular reactors are much safe against earthquakes. They have enough seismic protection. The design is much simpler, and they have a number of passive fail-safe safety features that reduces the chances of a nuclear accident. So small modular reactors are many times safer than large conventional nuclear reactors. So as a result, the land required is less. The safety measures that you should follow is less. So you can quickly execute the project with maximum safety levels and produce enough electricity as well. So around the country, if you set up enough small modular reactors, you can supply the grid with reliable, sustainable, clean energy that reduces our dependency on fossil fuels while pushing our journey towards net zero emissions. This is the critical importance of small modular reactors. Even their requirement of low enriched uranium is very less compared to a conventional large nuclear plant. Countries can easily start supplying the low enriched uranium while matching the international safety standards laid down by International Atomic Energy Agency. So because of reduced international obligations and easier access to nuclear fuel, it will be cheaper to set up these plants. The cost involved, the time involved can be significantly brought down if small modular reactors are set up to complement the large nuclear plants. The writer says India in particular has a great opportunity because India has the technology, India has the resources needed. All we have to do is we have to amend the Atomic Energy Act and enable the Department of Atomic Energy and other stakeholders to focus more on small modular reactors. Right now, NPCIL, the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, along with Department of Atomic Energy, they are just focused on large conventional nuclear plants. But if the right changes are made, if the right policy, legal, regulatory changes are made, and if the institutions are given the right support and resources, we can easily scale up the installation of small modular reactors across the country, and we can produce sufficient clean energy that will help us achieve net zero emissions by the defined target. Is that clear? Along with our investments in solar and wind power and in electric vehicles, our investments in small modular nuclear reactors can definitely help India achieve net zero emissions, according to the writer. So this is the argument the writer is making, and please make a note of these key arguments. Now looking at the next article, on the last page of the online edition, that's on page number 18, we have this article related to drug testing. I hope you know that when a new drug is developed, it goes through a very complicated process of testing to ensure its safety and efficacy. Whenever a new drug is brought out by a biotech company or a pharmaceutical company, before human usage of the drug has to be put through several rounds of clinical trials. It is put through a number of safety efficacy tests, and one of the initial stages of drug testing is animal testing. Correct? Since drugs can't be directly tested on human beings because of the risk of toxic damage, side effects, and even eventual death, right? The safety of the drug, the efficacy of the drug has to be tested out even before clinical trials can begin. So prior to granting approval for clinical human trials, the safety and efficacy has to be proven by the drug manufacturer through adequate animal testing. Is that clear? Now, even in the cosmetic industry, animal testing was widely prevalent. Not just in the drug industry, in the pharma industry, but even in cosmetic industry, animal testing was widely prevalent. But today around the world, there is a greater awakening about animal rights, about the inhuman damage caused to innocent sentient beings through our testing processes. So because of this global movement, many countries have banned cosmetic testing of products on animals, including India. India also has banned any unnecessary cosmetic trials and testing on animals. Most countries which are responsible, which are progressive, have already implemented this ban on the cosmetic industry. But when it comes to drugs, when it comes to even vaccines, pharmaceutical products, right? Many countries, they still depend on various animals like pigs, monkeys, then even rats, guinea pigs, etc. These are the preferred species to test out various drugs and pharmaceutical products before they are pushed towards human trials and human testing. The reason why we continue to rely on animal testing is because one is the safety issue. Since drugs can be risky to be administered directly on humans, to minimize the risk, animals are preferred for testing. And second, it is believed that some of these animals, they closely resemble human genetics and human physiology, like for example pigs, rats, monkeys, etc. They have very close resemblance to human tissues, human organs, and the way in which human physiology functions. So this is seen as a test ground to test the efficacy of drugs as well, along with testing the safety of the drug before pushing for clinical trials. But such drug testing definitely is a violation of animal rights. It's putting these innocent sentient beings through tremendous pain, through tremendous suffering. And today, thanks to advancement in technology, we can move away from animal testing. We no longer have to test drugs on animals because there are new technologies available to make a shift away from animal testing, even with regard to drugs and vaccines. In this regard, India has amended a few rules. The new drugs and clinical trial rules 2023 has been notified by the government of India with the objective of ending animal testing in medical research, particularly in drug testing. India is looking to implement a permanent ban in the coming years to end drug testing on animals forever. So you might ask, how will drug testing be carried out in the coming days? Will it be tested directly on humans? No, that is not possible as well. Today we have other mediums, other platforms which have come up to provide for more efficient and safer testing. And thanks to technologies like bioprinting, organ on chips, the development of 3D organoids through bioprinting, we are able to manufacture human tissue, human cells that essentially mimic human physiology. Organ on chip is a revolutionary technology. Essentially, organ tissue can be replicated on a test chip, on a test platform. By taking certain cells and developing it in a certain way through genetic engineering and biotechnology, it is possible to create these testing beds, and they're already being widely used in the industry. So it can mimic the functioning of a human heart. It can mimic the functioning of human blood supply, functions of liver, kidney, etc. You can even create a scale model of human physiological functions, and human tissue can be tested out for various drugs, not just for safety but even for their efficacy in treating a disease or in preventing a disease. Now, the other problem with animal testing was that it was never efficient. The efficacy could never be conclusively proven, because drugs tested on animals, they may not have the same efficacy on humans. That's why many drugs, they take decades of developmental process to achieve the right safety efficacy standards, right? They keep testing on animals without the right results, and as a result drug trials keep on dragging, which imposes a huge cost to the drug industry as well. And eventually the drugs they come out with, right, they may not be the best suited for human beings because it was never adequately tested on humans. Human trials are commenced only after animal testing has been gone through. But animal testing is not the right way. Physiology between humans and animals are eventually different. Even though there are some similarities, right, the results might vary. So this was a drawback in animal testing as well, along with violation of animal rights. Now with organ on chip and bioprinting, where human tissue can be printed, 3D organoids can be printed, you can more efficiently test these drugs and also ensure the safety of these drugs. So that is why the European Union, Canada, United States, all these major countries, even they are moving away from animal testing. Of course, it will not happen overnight. It will be done gradually, incrementally, beginning with drug testing. Animals might still be needed in medical research, alright, but at least as far as drug testing is concerned, we can gradually reduce our dependency on animal testing, which is humane, it is fair for animals, it upholds human rights, it will help drug and pharmaceutical companies to quickly test the drugs and bring out efficient drugs into the market. It will reduce their costs. It will reduce the time delay involved in drug development and drug testing. Alright? And it also produces more efficient drugs and safer drugs with little side effects on human beings. So this is what the column is talking about. The column is praising the government of India for bringing out the new drugs and clinical trial rules 2023, which has set the path for banning usage of animals in drug testing, and this marks a major shift in India's pharmaceutical industry. Is that clear? So this is it as far as the mains articles are concerned. These are the three big articles that I had to cover in detail. Now coming to the prelims section, we have a few small articles in today's newspaper that is very relevant for your prelims. Now look at this article on page number 1. It's very important for internal security under cyber security. According to this article, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has commenced an open public challenge to develop an indigenous web browser. Now, we all use mobile phones, laptops, computers, right? The way we access the internet is through our browsers. And the most preferred browsers would be Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, right? Apple Safari or Microsoft's Edge. These are the preferred web browsers or internet browsers that we are all using. Now the concern for the Indian government here is that all these web browsers are of foreign origin, right? These are all foreign products owned by foreign companies with eventual influence of the foreign governments as well. And any such excessive dependency in the information technology domain is a huge cybersecurity risk, because there are many incidents where foreign companies have collaborated with foreign intelligence agencies to create security loopholes in these softwares that they develop, which we call as security backdoors. For example, American big tech companies have been forced by the National Security Agency of the US to install security backdoors so that US intelligence agencies can hack into these systems by exploiting the weaknesses in the software and the hardware, which is known only to the manufacturers and the US government. So depending on foreign software and foreign hardware is always a major security risk for the country. It's a huge cybersecurity risk. In this regard, we had another article yesterday which unfortunately I missed accidentally, which referred to the deployment of an indigenous operating system in the Ministry of Defense called the Maya operating system. See, most computers that we use, they run either on Microsoft Windows, right, or Apple's Mac operating system, or Google's Android, right, or some run on even Linux-based open source platforms. But all these operating systems that are foreign developed, that are of foreign origin, always represent a major security risk, especially if these computers are being used in our critical infrastructure. Now imagine a Microsoft Windows system in Prime Minister's office. Imagine an Apple Mac system in the Defense Ministry, right? Imagine such equipment with foreign hardware, foreign software in our intelligence agencies, in our armed forces, in our power sector, in our banking and financial institutions. This always represents a major security risk. Hostile actors, foreign intelligence agencies, foreign military forces, right, or even terror groups, they could always exploit this, because you cannot guarantee foolproof cybersecurity when you're depending on foreign products. That is why India is trying to push indigenization of the hardware and software. Is that clear? So to reduce the dependency on foreign operating systems, an indigenous operating system known as Maya OS has been developed by Indian agencies and institutions, which is being installed in all the computers of Ministry of Defense in the South Block. Gradually, this will be extended to the armed forces of India as well. The Indian Navy has already approved the adoption of Maya operating system to completely replace Windows and Mac. Even other key ministries and departments and agencies, even they will gradually start adopting the Maya operating system, which is an indigenously developed operating system based on the Ubuntu platform, which is a Linux-based open source platform. Is that clear? So this was a development reported yesterday in the newspapers. It also comes with inbuilt security features called Chakraview that provides for high-level encryption and also to track the end user and to keep track of the security threats. So it's a fairly well-designed operating system which is being deployed in the Defense Ministry. It will be gradually scaled up to other ministries and government agencies as well. Now in the back of this, there's another report which points out that the government of India has launched a challenge for Indians to develop an indigenous web browser to reduce our dependency on foreign browsers. Is that clear? So Ministry of Electronics and IT is running this open challenge. It is inviting software developers across the country to develop an indigenous web browser. Now in this regard, the challenge for India is that the browser will have to comply with the standards of Controller of Certifying Authorities. Controller of Certifying Authorities is a nodal agency in India to issue digital signatures, including the digital certificates known as SSL. Computer science students would know what I'm talking about, right? But don't go in depth. Don't scratch your head about what these certificates are. I'll just give you a very simple basic explanation. SSL stands for Security Sockets Layer Certificates. These are certificates which are embedded into websites, which are embedded into browsers, and the browsers check for the safety of a website by looking at these certificates which are issued by recognized certifying authorities. In every country there will be a recognized certifying authority. In the case of India, we have CCA, Controller of Certifying Authorities, which was set up under the IT Act of 2000. Under the Information Technology Act of 2000, the Controller of Certifying Authorities, or CCA, was established to issue these security certificates and to issue and regulate digital signatures in the country. Is that clear? So the web browser which will be developed indigenously will have to comply with these security standards. It should get the certificate, the security certificate, from the Controller of Certifying Authorities. But there is one challenge for India. The challenge is that web browsers, they not just look for SSL certificates. SSL certificate essentially encrypts the websites that you're developing. Every website will be given a unique SSL certificate, and the browsers through which you're accessing the website, they will check for the certificate. If the certificate is trusted, only then the browser will give access, thereby limiting exposure to malicious websites from where cyber attacks can happen. Is that clear? So browsers like Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, etc., they test a website before logging in. They look at the trust certificates which are given, the SSL certificates which are installed. These encrypted certificates are given by certified controlling authorities in every country. In the case of India, the CCA, Controller of Certifying Authorities, has given these certificates. But the problem is with root certifying authority. In India, we have had a challenge with root certifying authority where the root source code is tested by a browser before granting access to websites. Problem is that the CCA has established a root certifying authority in India, but there has been a very bad track record. Along with checking the security level of the website, the root source code also has to be certified. For that, we have set up a controlling authority, the root certifying authority, under the Controller of Certifying Authorities. But one of the certificates it had issued through NIC, the National Informatics Center, which is the lead government agency for all the government websites, it had apparently issued fraudulent root certificates, and as a result, foreign browsers are not giving recognition to these root certificates given by CCA. Is that clear? These root certificates which are given to certify the root security, it has run into problems because NIC had allegedly issued fraudulent certificates to some websites. This was flagged by major browsers like Google Chrome, Apple Safari and others, and they have all blocked some of the certificates given by NIC. Is that clear? They have flagged it as fraudulent. So this is where India is now relying on foreign certificates. We are using certificates given by foreign certifying authorities, as the Indian certifying authority has been blocked and blacklisted by most of the web browsers. It's in this context our indigenous web browser will help. It will reduce our foreign dependency, it will improve cybersecurity, and hence the government has launched this open initiative to help develop our indigenous Indian web browser. Alright, so please make a note of these key points. Next, on page number 5, we have an article referring to the elephant population in Karnataka. This article is important because Karnataka has the highest number of elephants in the country. Is that clear? Karnataka is home to the highest number of elephants in the country, and according to a latest elephant census conducted by the Karnataka Forest Department, the elephant population has increased to 6,395. Karnataka has registered a jump of 364 elephants compared to the previous census. As of 2010, Karnataka had around 5,740 elephants. This had increased to 6,072 in the 2012 census, but it had slightly declined to 6,049 in the 2017 census. That was the last census conducted. Further census was disrupted by the COVID pandemic. So now the latest census data from Karnataka is showing that the elephant population is anywhere between 5,914 to 6,877. And on an average, Karnataka is estimated to have 6,395 elephants. So this makes Karnataka the state with the highest number of elephants, with the highest elephant density. The important reserves which host elephants are the Bandipur Tiger Reserve, which has the highest elephant density, followed by the Nagarhole Tiger Reserve. Both Bandipur and Nagarhole are part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, which is shared with Tamil Nadu and Kerala. Alright, so elephant being an endangered species on the IUCN Red List, it's crucial to identify the existing population, keep track of their migratory corridors as well. So Karnataka has worked closely with neighboring states like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Goa and Maharashtra to come out with this verifiable census data which helps in the conservation efforts. Is that clear? So these are some important facts that you get from this article. Next, on page number 12, it has been reported that the government is looking to sell food grains in the open market in order to stabilize the food prices. Because the prices of essential food grains has increased. You might have noticed in the market the price of rice, wheat and atta, that is wheat flour, the prices have gone up because of a mismatch in the demand supply situation. So to stabilize the supply side, the Food Corporation of India, which maintains a buffer stock of these essential critical grains, is going to release these food grains in the market through open markets sales scheme. Through open market operations, open market sales scheme, additional food grains, that is rice, wheat and wheat flour, will be released into the market by the government in order to stabilize the prices and cool down the inflation which is being seen in the food segment. So you should know what is open market sales scheme. This is a route through which the Food Corporation of India, which holds the buffer stocks in the country, it auctions the food grains to increase the supply of the grains, thereby leading to reduction of prices of essential food grains. Once the government approves the offloading through open market sales scheme, the Food Corporation of India will sell the surplus, the buffer stock which it is holding, through an e-auction that's conducted on the commodity exchanges. We have the National Commodity and Derivatives Exchange Limited, which is a platform for trading agricultural commodities. So at this platform, the surplus food grains which are held as buffer stock by Food Corporation of India, some of it will be offloaded to increase the supply in the market and thereby stabilize the prices. Next, according to this article on page 12, in the Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, massive frauds have been detected by the Comptroller Auditor General in its regular audit. I hope you know that Ayushman Bharat has two components, and one of the key component is the PM Jan Arogya Yojana. So under the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which was launched in 2018, India is running the world's largest health insurance scheme. Entire families are provided up to 5 lakhs insurance to take care of essential healthcare services, including tertiary healthcare. Is that clear? So government bears the cost of the insurance to provide a basic health cover for families in the country and to step up tertiary healthcare in India. So in this ambitious insurance scheme, a number of frauds have been detected by the Comptroller Auditor General. The CAG has pointed out that in many cases there is a nexus between hospitals and few middle agents who are committing fraud entries, and they're using dead people's identities to claim the insurance amount. They have taken identities of people who are already dead and shown that they have been treated in hospitals by fraudulently making entries in hospital records. Based on these wrong entries, they have claimed the insurance money. It points to a corruption nexus involving few government officials and hospitals and few middlemen. This is a major concern flagged by the CAG, and it has also pointed out that 7.5 lakh beneficiaries under the scheme have the same fake number, which is 10 digits of 9. How can 7.5 lakh beneficiaries have such a fake number? Right? By using this as the mobile number, several fake claims have been made, and this has been flagged by the Comptroller Auditor General. But the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has defended by saying that this is not a fraud which is happening. It is a case of mobile numbers not being captured in the data. See, this whole scheme is linked with Aadhaar. There is Aadhaar based verification which is done while the insurance amount is being approved and released to the concerned beneficiary. It's a completely cashless insurance which directly funds the hospital where the patient has gotten treated. So by using one fake number, so many beneficiaries have been registered, and CAG believes that this has been used to commit fraudulent transactions. But the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare is saying that mobile number may not have been correctly captured, or it was not mandatory to get hold of the correct mobile number of all the beneficiaries, and hence this number might have been entered. So essentially the government is defending itself, saying that these frauds have not happened, but the CAG audit has flagged these major concerns. So please be aware of the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which is one of the key components of the Ayushman Bharat scheme. Next, on page 13, we have a small update on the status of the Chinese economy. It's a very disturbing development that China's economy has dipped into deflation. According to data from the National Bureau of Statistics of the Chinese government, consumer price index has dropped 0.3% on a year-to-year basis. CPI is basically a measure of inflation at the consumer level. And the drop in CPI inflation is very bad news as it indicates a deflationary trend in the Chinese economy. Even the producer price index, which measures price levels at the producer level, has declined by 4.4% for the 10th consecutive month. This points to a substantive decline in demand in the Chinese economy. Production levels have gone down consistently, and China is seen to be struggling to come out of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope you know that China followed a very strict zero COVID policy. It implemented blanket lockdowns for 2-3 years that dealt a devastating impact to its own economy. Along with that, there are global challenges as well created by the Russia-Ukraine war and Western sanctions. And as a result, Chinese economy has come under tremendous stress. So now the data, which is official data from the Chinese Communist Party itself, is indicating a deflationary trend. And trust me, this is not good news for India as well. Some of you might feel happy if China underperforms, but you shouldn't be happy because the health of the Chinese economy is critical for the global economy itself. Even today, China dominates the global supply chains. Any adverse development in China will adversely affect India and the rest of the global markets as well. So please make a note of this deflationary trend. Coming to the last article on page 14, the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, which I had discussed a few days back. This organization has held its summit, and the South American countries which are members of this organization, they have decided to implement few measures to protect the Amazon forest. The other day, we spoke about this organization. I had explained the importance of the Amazon forest in South America as far as absorbing carbon is concerned. The Amazon is a major carbon sink. It is critical in our fight against climate change, and it is home to a very rich biodiversity, including a diverse set of flora and fauna. But Amazon has been facing increased threat across South American countries, particularly in Brazil. Under the previous government, when Brazil was ruled by a far right-wing leader, Jair Bolsonaro, large-scale destruction of Amazon was carried out in the name of an economic development. Industries, contractors were allowed to burn down Amazon forests. So now, the new Brazilian leader, Lula da Silva, who has a strong commitment to environment protection, has brought these South American countries together again and revived this old grouping, the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, to implement certain measures to conserve and protect the Amazonian forests. So this organization was actually set up in the year 1995. Is that clear? The members of this group includes Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Peru, Suriname and Venezuela. These are the Latin American countries which are members of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization. It had last met in late 1990s. The group had not met for more than 15 years. So finally, with the leadership of Brazil, the grouping has been revived, and these countries following the summit have decided to tackle deforestation. They will be implementing several measures to protect the Amazonian forest, to tackle deforestation and to conserve the biodiversity. They will also take measures against hunting and poaching, which is widely prevalent in Amazon, which has been encouraged by certain governments. So they'll work together to protect the forests, to promote afforestation and even tackle hunting and poaching. So these targets have been adopted, these measures have been announced under the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, which adopted the Belém Declaration at a place known as Belém, which is at the mouth of the Amazon River. That is where the meeting took place, the summit was held. So the Belém Declaration, brought out by the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, provides for these commitments through which South American countries are seeking to conserve the Amazonian forest. So this completes my detailed discussion of today's The Hindu newspaper. Please take up these questions for your mains answer writing practice. And also don't forget, head to our Telegram channel. The link is provided in the description because we have a quiz on some of these topics which will help you revise these articles again. I hope you guys have liked today's session. Do let me know how it went in the comments. Please like the video, share it with other aspirants, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So that is it from my side. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, have a good day.